to hear myself talk. What's up, everybody? We have not had a podcast in a while. I've been holed up in a number of ways, but we've been focusing on working on the new website for Audi Club, including a lot of the membership transaction stuff and a lot of kind of mechanical behind the scenes stuff, CRM, that users will be experiencing, members will be experiencing soon. We have been wanting to focus on that. So kind of let things like podcasts that are a little less critical kind of fall to the wayside while we prioritize getting that completed as it's way overdue. And we're looking forward to having it done. So rather than continuing to go long without having a podcast, I decided to try and take some time. Right now I have COVID, asymptomatic. I wouldn't even know I had it, but my wife had it. So I tested and it turns out I have it. So I'm quarantining, going to take a little bit of time to basically go through some stuff I learned in making the last magazine and riff on my own. So we'll see how much I can talk to myself. And if I manage to do it, great. Maybe it'll make it an entertaining podcast, or maybe we'll just all be convinced at how much I like to hear myself talk. So what's the point of this podcast today? Obviously, we don't have a guest. And I've been wanting to do one about the last issue of the magazine. The last issue of the magazine was kind of focused on technology, right? And a big part of that focus was electromobility. And I've owned an EV for a number of years now, and we use it as a daily driver. It's my wife's car. And we've learned a lot. Thought I'd learned a lot already, but with a focus on EV, learned a lot more. And we covered a lot of ins and outs of different parts of the EV experience at Audi and beyond. And so while we told all those stories in the magazine, I'd encourage, if you're an Audi Club member, you probably have a copy already. Not an Audi Club member and you want it, we have extra copies. So would love to have you join. Those magazines go out to Audi Club members. So typically that would be like, once you join, you get the next 4 issues from that point. But if you really want to see this issue or any particular issue and you join, that issue's out, maybe you missed it, you can call into our office and let us know that you joined. We'll confirm that and that you'd like the current issue, and we can get that out to you. So I'll go through what we kind of did in the magazine, and because I'd love to kind of touch on what I learned in a bunch of those things. And then if you like what you heard, or you're interested in learning more about what you heard, by all means, join if you haven't, and drop a note to our office, let Bill know, and we can get one out to you. Before I get into the magazine, it's probably worth stating, with EV, it's a touchy subject, right? Sometimes I feel it's like an early adopter of EV, somebody who gets the auto industry is going there, there's going to be a big transition, and that's basically inevitable, right? Like it will be happening, and ICE is kind of on its, at least on its way towards more obscurity in the automotive industry, where EV will probably be the most dominant form of mobility. In the next couple of years, it'll probably start to shift to that, right? It's already been growing in quite a big portions of the industry. And so when you're kind of in and around this, there are a lot of people who are uncomfortable or don't want to see that change happen. Maybe people really like their ICE cars. I know I like the ones I have. I love them very much, and I'm quite passionate about them. But I also really like our EV, but there are people who are really into ICE and really do not want to see that change. And they kind of almost take offense to that, or at least put off a bit by it. And then there are other people who are really, really ready to make that change already, right? Like they're very concerned about, our global impact with carbon dioxide production, and so wanting to move to electromobility faster. Obviously, you can get into a whole discussion about like the cleanliness of battery production, and everything else, and that's a whole other discussion. But where I'm going with that is more as technology picks up, and it's already has quite a bit, we'll have more energy dense and cheaper and cleaner to produce batteries. And that's what any industry does. It improves upon itself. Look at internal combustion from when it started to internal combustion now. It's a very different animal. Same with EV, right? So comparing where EV is today or where it was 5 years ago, when a lot of the current in production battery technology was developed, it's just not really a fair comparison, right? So let's just assume it's going to go there. But it's hard sometimes because I find myself as an early adopter and somebody who's pro EV but also loves ICE, in between like kind of two factions, right? And speaking to the extremes now, there are people on all sides of the spectrum, but you have like people who are just like completely anti-EV and quite ardent about that, and then you have people who are convinced that it's happening tomorrow and it's a little bit more Kool-Aid like, right? Like they don't want to see the shortcomings of EV and electromobility when it comes to that. So I thought I'd kind of touch on that. I experienced EV in a way even I hadn't experienced in the making this issue of the magazine, and so I figured I'd touch on all that. And then since we launched the magazine, Audi has also launched their latest EV concept cars. So the Active Sphere concept is, we're told, PPE based. PPE is Audi's new architecture for electrics, more luxury oriented products. So it'll house everything from the next generation A6, next generation Q6. Those are kind of the inbound close products. Porsche Macan, some other Volkswagen Group products, but more luxurious, larger car products. And this is based on that component set. And the idea is really interesting, right? When you take EVs and the kind of less limitations you have on packaging, it's, motors and batteries are much more compact than, say, an internal combustion engine car. You can do a lot of things. So while this Active Sphere is almost like almost looks like an A7 Sportback. It's probably about that size, and at the same time, it is pickup, right? It's got suicide, if you will, right? Like the barn door style opening side doors, and then unlike a Sportback, it's got this unique tailgate that, like, with the rear glass kind of slides forward, and it reveals a bed, and there's a gate at the back instead of this sort of hatchback that a Sportback has. So it makes it's not going to replace an F-150 or that sort of thing, or even a smaller pickup truck, but it creates a very usable bed for somebody with an active lifestyle, for like bikes or gear or whatever. And then with it closed, it's much more of a car, although because it's raised and elevated, it's probably like almost like an A7 Sportback body on like a Q7 chassis, almost like, while it's an EV, it's that, right? From the wheels down, or the waist down, it's almost like an SUV, and that lends itself to EVs, right? Because you have often battery packaging in the bottom, so like you have where you see those kind of ribbed side sills on this car. That's that kind of bulk, right, where those lower batteries would be, and then above it is very much an A7, right? Maybe even a more aggressively low roof line than an A7. So it's an interesting concept. It's with the glass side sills and the glass single frame grille, that interior. It's more concept car than it is reality, let's say. But at the same time, it's easy to see how Audi could make this sort of product. Where it's like this sort of conversion Sportback into pickup truck, if you will. So Audi calls the body style Active Sportback, and if they make it, I'm sure they'll sell a ton of them. And I wouldn't be surprised if they do multiple sizes, like like an A5 or an A7. They haven't kind of indicated that they will build it, but they were sitting through the presentation on the vehicle. They were very encouraged by what they created here, and definitely see the market potential of it. So neat thing. Wanted to share that because it's kind of a new and big deal at Audi. But in the meantime, we did just wrap on the technique issue, if you will. Vorsprung durch Technik is Audi's progress through technology, loosely translated tagline that they've used since the earliest days of Quattro. Audi's got a long tradition of like moving new technology, whether that's quattro wheel drive, whether that's aluminum space frames or multi-material space frames, or diesel. I know that that's a mixed thing, right? But with Dieselgate and everything else, but there's no denying that Audi using like synthetic diesels and hybrid drivetrains at Le Mans is significant and dominated for years. And the advantages of diesel, unfortunately, sometimes are lost in the cloud of what Dieselgate represented. But at the same time, it is significant technology, and so I embrace it, even if sometimes it's a little politically incorrect, just because of what happened, and for good reason. But at the same time, objectively, it was still interesting technology and still used today quite a bit in Europe. Anyway, we did this technique issue as a result, and we usually do our 4 covers, right? So we did one for the car. I'm going to show a couple alternates that we did for this issue too, just playing around here. But so we were looking at doing one for the car and the RSQ e-tron, and then went to visit Elegend when we were in Germany. That's an alternate that we did there. And then we also did one on Hoonigan and filming of Electrikhana and Ken Block. Have a couple alternate designs for that. And then finally did a feature on an e-tron S that Pacific German had built and Food for Audi shot, and just cool. Shows where, even enthusiasts with privately owned cars are tuning their cars. So it was an interesting addition to this kind of electromobility heavy issue. It wasn't expressly an electromobility issue. It was more about technology, but of course, electromobility is the best next big technology at Audi. And so wanted to make sure that that was a big part of it. With the issue of the magazine, we tried to keep it neutral, right? Like pragmatically, members of Audi Club are internal combustion enthusiasts, they're EV enthusiasts, they're all of the above. And I think the commonality at Audi is, and amongst Audi enthusiasts, is an appreciation for new technology across the board. So knowing that we're not here to wave the flag of everything new is going to be e-tron, that's a big part of what's going on right now, but we're also here to wave the flag for all the other great cars, new and old, that Audi's built over the years. And so that's very much in the thinking of the way we chose content and chose to approach everything we do. So there's that. We know that EVs will see, like, they're coming and they're going to dominate and they're going to take over the industry. And that doesn't mean ICE will go away, right? You see Volkswagen Group brands like Porsche experimenting with synthetic fuels and what have you. It's probably safe to assume that internal combustion will stick around. I think the main though question for most automotive consumers is how soon most of the industry kind of makes the switch over, and so that's always part of the discussion. One of the things we kind of covered in this issue, speaking to the internal combustion side, is a couple new models that popped up, celebrate, I guess, the sunsetting, if you will, of the TT and the R8, which are two of Audi's, iconic models and even you can see in this press photography, I'm sure the artistic license of the photographers or CGI artists who created these is definitely seen, right? You can see the sunset theme is not lost. I can go through a lot of that photography, and there's a lot more. These are the TTRS Icon Edition from Germany, and then the R8 GT that is coming to the US. TTRS, of course, is already gone in the US, and we're down to TTS and TT, and both of those will probably see their end of availability, if not by the end of this year, 2023, then not long after, right? So for that reason too, it's kind of sad, right? Like these were such significant models. They're such pure models in so many ways. From when you look at the internal combustion technology, where there's the R8 with its V10 and the Huracan are the last normally aspirated V10s in the market. Supercars normally aspirated in general are hard to come by. And the TTRS, of course, with its 5-cylinder turbo, the 2.5 TFSI or the just turbocharged 5 cylinders in general are also a theme at Audi since the early 80s, and iconic as well, and so much loved, and such a strong identifier for Audi. Seeing them going away without direct replacements, even ED replacements named yet, is kind of hard to watch. So interesting to watch it and lamenting it a little bit, right? Like that's just kind of we know it's coming, but kind of wishing and hoping that Audi knows to handle it with the care and delicacy it deserves, the respect it deserves, is something I think everybody wishes and hopes for. So waiting to see how. I know Audi plans to celebrate the TT and the R8 more as they head out, and we're looking forward to seeing what they do, but at the same time we're also looking forward to seeing that lineage not end, and how it doesn't end. I guess it's up to Audi to decide, right? Whether it's something internal combustion, EV, or some sort of mix of the two through some sort of hybrid. But I don't even know that already it's been decided on that. Probably next TT will be electric, but it's something we're all eager to kind of see how it plays out, because man, if everything's crossovers in the future, nothing against Q5s and Q7s and vehicles like that, they're excellent products. I've had a couple of my family too. You know, I appreciate them, but there's something that drives passion when you're talking about a sports car or even an Avant, the RS6, that I just really hope that you know, or I'm eager to see what's next. Anyway, next up, flew to California and did the Q4 launch, the domestic launch for Q4 as a new model, and we drove them in kind of like the area in and around, kind of in between LA and San Diego. Share the car I drove, which is like a Sportback S-Line. On one hand, I was kind of mixed, right? Like you go into this vehicle and you're like, man, it's a small crossover, right? So it's Audi's most economic at this point crossover. Inside, it's actually more Q5 size, so it's great use of space. It shows to the strength of the EVs. But crossovers in general, kind of like what I was saying before, like I get worried because you get closer to the applianceification of cars, right? Like they become this just sort of very utilitarian people mover or stuff mover, and less about the kind of just driving enjoyment that tends to be represented by sports cars or sporting cars like Audi's RS models, et cetera. So like, you know, knowing that Audi has to like launch strong in the EV space, seeing them launch with crossovers makes total sense. But driving a small SUV isn't exactly my idea of like going for an enthusiast drive. And so even that morning when we went out, they said, okay, you drive today is going to be like out of, I think it was like Oceanside, California. But anyway, we drove the car around town, kind of out of town, and then out into kind of more canyon-like winding driving. So you see like kind of normal commuter traffic like most owners would experience, and then you see kind of more sporting driving situations where you might go out and enjoy yourself if you're in a you know, kind of a sports car, or you might, you know, the fantasy is you're out there in a sports car, right? But the reality is I'm out there in a small crossover and it's electric. And I've got to say, like, I was flatly surprised at the car and how good it was. And part of that is, you know, we own an e-tron, and knowing what a big, heavy car that kind of drives like at times, an e-tron is like 400 pounds heavier than an SQ7. So like, give you an idea of the kind of mass you're moving around in an e-tron. The Q4 e-tron is quite a bit lighter. I cover how much lighter in this story. I don't remember offhand how many 100 pounds lighter it is, but it's quite a bit more nimble on its feet. Steel suspension helps. Obviously, the battery is low in all of these vehicles in the chassis, so that kind of keeps the center of gravity down. But in an e-tron, when you're like in corners and stuff, you still kind of, well, it's flat because the weight is so low. You're still pushing so much weight around it. Like you never quite get around physics where like you get into an extreme situation in wet or, you know, at the edge of adhesion, whatever, and you start, you know, coming to terms with the reality of the mass that you're moving around. And in the Q4, it just felt a lot lighter and more nimble on its feet. And on top of that, it has not full on one pedal driving. And again, we'll touch on that in the story. So read the magazine for that. I'm not going to dig too much into one pedal driving, but it's basically like you get off the throttle and you kind of come into torque braking immediately. It's almost like driving around in like second gear in a stick car, right? You're higher up and you let off and you have all this immediate torque braking. That's effectively what it does. And in sporting driving around canyons, it's like it works like you're in low gear in a manual transmission, and you can come off throttle and torque brake much like you would in a manual car. And that made it so much more interesting to drive. You could drive more with the torque braking and using that. And it's something I miss about automatic cars. You can kind of do in a DSG, right? But in EVs, it's kind of lost, but it's not actually with one pedal driving. So that was really cool. And I actually came away really enjoying it. Like it's still, because it's a small SUV or a small crossover, it's still a bit of an appliance just in form, right? And I'm not talking about I actually think it's quite handsome, the Audi design language on it. And, you know, kind of using the old C3 Avant kind of like glass down around with a spoiler. It's a neat interpretation of a small SUV sportback in, you know, both using modern and iconic Audi design. So like, that's all cool, but it's still, again, an SUV. And so I don't know, I'm still looking forward to seeing the sports cars or the sporting Avants or sedans that eventually come that are a little bit more in kind of speaking to the models from Audi's ICE era that I really appreciated most. But I've got to say, it's a great product, and I'm sure they're selling a ton of them. I would probably get one. Maybe we will. Who knows? When our e-tron comes time for replacing, but I went into it thinking I'd be really critical of it because it's a small SUV, and that's expected, right? It was just very predictable that it would be a small SUV that Audi would kind of lead in with. But it was frankly very good. And kind of right after that, right when I left Seaside, Oceanside, where the heck it was, I borrowed an RS Tron GT and headed up to LA. That was kind of like a SoCal Euro, big SoCal Euro was the following weekends, and I was done on like a Thursday, so I was able to borrow a press car, RS Tron GT that they had down there that needed moving back up to LA anyway, and they let me borrow it for a couple of days. Got up to Good Vibes Breakfast Club up on Angeles Crest Highway at Newcomb's Ranch, and the RS Tron GT, obviously same platform as the Porsche Taycan, but I would argue better looking. Like the dash controls a little bit better than the Taycan too, and just very, very fast, very capable car. I had an excellent time going up through Angeles Crest. I think I eventually kind of started to feel a little bit greasy in the tires because, again, you're moving so much weight around and there's so many curves and switchbacks on Angeles Crest, and I was kind of arguably keeping up some 911s and an Acura NSX that I kind of found myself behind as I was headed up there. There's this Cars and Coffee happens at Good Vibes Breakfast Club, and a lot of car enthusiasts go out there. So head out there on a Friday morning, and you're more than likely going to end up behind more car enthusiasts, even more so than you would normally catch on Angeles Crest, which is a popular place for enthusiasts to go with cars. So yeah, the e-tron GT is just a great car. It's still heavy though, right? And it's still quite big. I think that's the other side of it. Where like speaking of the TT, right, with TT going away, it's such a great little size. You can kind of pick your lane or pick your line and not leave your lane on most roads. I've shown some really tight, like Italian or whatever roads. A TT is a really great size and just so low and compact and light, frankly, with its aluminum space frame, and especially with like a 2-liter, maybe not the most powerful engine, but you just have so little weight in that vehicle that like it's a very tossable thing. And the e-tron GT is, it is a big grand touring 4-door, right? So like the GT name is fitting, but like I don't know, just kind of is what it is. I loved it. And again, I'd love to have one. Frankly, it was much more sporting than the Q4. But honestly, here's the weird thing. The Q4 is so much lighter. And with the steel suspension, it almost seems as tossable as the e-tron GT. I didn't test these back to back, so this isn't a scientific study. I'm just kind of going on kind of like seat of the pants impressions. But it was also interesting to see the e-tron GT shares a lot of the switch gear as the Q4, right? So a lot of the central stack switches and infotainment and things are shared with Q4. I'm looking forward to the sort of like B mode, single pedal style driving mode, which isn't currently in the RS Tron GT. It does have some kind of recuperation shift down points. It's not really shifting down, right? It's just setting up different levels of torque braking with software, but you do that with shift paddles on the steering wheel, and then you don't go fully into this like B mode thing that they're calling it in Q4. And I could see where that's hopefully like a mid life cycle kind of freshening new thing to be added to the car, because it was really, really enjoyable to have, not just as I'm sure it's great for like recuperating energy and around town traffic there too, but honestly, when you're speaking to enthusiasts, at least, right? Like or at least in the case where I'm thinking about the torque braking, I'm less cared about the recuperation. Okay, if I'm commuting, I care, but like otherwise, if I'm driving more spiritedly, I'm just concerned about like weight transfer and braking, et cetera. And so like this torque braking and I don't know, it would just be a great addition to the e-tron GT. Moving along, the next story we did in the book after California, I caught up with Brian Scotto of Hoonigan, and who's also on Audi Club's board of directors. Brian's a really authentically Audi, legitimate Audi enthusiast has been so for years. Has been around the block. Hoonigan, of course, for years. So, and of course, they've been doing these Gymkhana films, and this was before, very tragically, Ken Block passed away on January 2nd of this year. Brian and I caught up in December. to kind of talk about the making of Electrikhana, which, if you haven't watched it, is one of the Gymkhana style Hoonigan films that's available on YouTube. But this was done with the Audi S1 Etron and the kind of custom built concept that Audi had done when they hooked up with Hoonigan to make these films, made to look like the old S1, right, that would have raced at Pikes Peak. And they ran it at Vegas for the filming of Electrikhana 1. Really impressive. And we kind of talked about what they learned in the making of that, right? Like, for me, this was one of the most interesting stories, because Hoonigan and what Brian and Ken and the team there were doing with those Gymkhana films is kind of showing this fantasy, if you will, of what not a lot of people do with their cars. But it's such a show of capability and how you can have fun with these things, but they're not just appliances, right? And I think Hoonigan resides on this polar opposite of the idea of vehicles used as appliance or vehicles used as an expression or having fun, etc. And that's decidedly the side that Hoonigan is on, right? And it's a lifestyle. It's something to be passionate about and to be enjoyed, not just something to get you from A to B. And so seeing how they embrace EV and electric is really interesting, right? Of course, being able to tie in with Audi, Brian being an enthusiast for Audi and having a passion for Audi for years, being able to tie in with Audi, that deal came together largely because of Brian. And I'm sure being able to do it was very exciting to him, perhaps doing it EV only, because though they built, Ken built the Sport Quattro, Brian has his Coupe Quattro, and those are all ICE cars. The deal with Audi was to do Electrikhanas only, right? So like using electrics to do these. And that was, I think, a shrewd move on Audi's part, because it was a decision to spend, I have to imagine, an exorbitant amount of money to build these cars, but to show that it's not just about A to B travel like you might have in an autonomous sphere concept or whatever, but that it's also about doing these really passion-inducing and sporting things with the cars. And there aren't really any racing series, I guess Formula E sort of, but not really. There aren't really ways right now in motorsport to sort of express that. I think Audi's explored that with Formula E. They've explored it with the hybrids at Le Mans. They've explored it with the car. But by doing it as Volkswagen did at Pikes Peak, or by doing as Porsche did with the 919 hybrid, once they took it off the leash and took it outside of FIA rules and just ran for record lap times at tracks. These are very unique ways, kind of out of the box ways, thinking of doing and showing what these vehicles are capable of without, in kind of more open ways that sometimes motorsport rules won't really allow you to do. And that's exactly what they did with Electrikhana, right? They allowed them to do whatever the hell they wanted. And they did some really cool stuff. And so in that story, Brian kind of shared with me a lot of the technical lessons learned about what they could do with the car, not having the going back to the shifting down, right? Like, not when you have a transmission, you can change the weight of the car by changing gear and changing acceleration, right? So, or deceleration. And so that's a really interesting way to make these tricks happen. And so working with the Hoonitron at the time, it didn't really have a way to do that. They're doing different things, and they're able to do some things much bigger, and they're not able to do other things at all, right? Like, and so it's very much almost like a bottled down version of what the rest of the industry is experiencing with moving to EVs, right? There's a lot of things you can do with an EV that you can't do with an ICE car, and there are a lot of things you can't do that you can only do with an ICE car. And so learning that is I guess the magic, and the fact that Audi kind of put this trust in Hoonigan and Ken in particular to sort of experience that, to experiment with it, is really progressive thinking in an enthusiast capacity, right? So it's encouraging that Audi would put that much investment in this side of the business, right? It's more often than not, you see the Q4 and e-tron and these kind of safe people mover type products, and you think, oh, that maybe they don't care about the driving enthusiasm things. You see the TT going away and the R8 going away, and you think, oh gosh, it's they've lost the plot. But I don't think they have. I think sometimes some executives do, right? Like it's very all encompassing to see where electrics go and how much of the business that's going to come. And of course, you need to make money to make all this happen. But at the same time, an investment in things like Electrikhana clearly show that Audi is very concerned and very, it's very important to them that EV be more than just A to B travel and with an electric drivetrain. So really encouraging. I guess beyond that, before I move away from Electrikhana and Hoonigan, I probably ought to talk about Ken. I didn't know Ken. Unfortunately, I never had the chance to meet him. I was supposed to go to filming in Vegas when it was initially scheduled, and then it got pushed back because of some challenges they had with scheduling and technical difficulties, and got pushed back a couple months. And unfortunately, it was scheduled next during family vacation that I had already booked with my wife and kids, and so that wasn't going to work. Fortunately, Leanne Copers from our team was able to go and attend and be part of that. So maybe we'll have to have her on a podcast sometime to talk about it. But beyond that, maybe seeing him from afar or whatever. But while I've gotten to know Brian over the years, and he's a great individual, when it comes to Ken Block, I can only live through the experiences others share with me. So whether it's Brian or Dave Pucarora, who worked with him in his Park City, Hoonigan racing facility, et cetera. Everything I hear is that he was such an incredible individual, beyond the influence and the inspiration that he was to all of us who are car enthusiasts and what he did online. Just that he was a great dad and fantastic family man, and great to the people around him and inspirational, et cetera. Beyond just cars is really notable. And he's a loss to his passing is will affect the car industry and the car hobby quite a bit. We've already seen so much about him, so I don't know that I can offer anything else other than I hope what Ken inspired and what Ken had set into motion doesn't end as Ken goes away, right? I hope that others pick up the baton there and keep going with it. I think that's one, what Ken would have wanted, but two, I think what's the car hobby, it is what the car hobby needs, and it's what the car industry needs, because in a world of autonomous appliances, what's the point? It becomes a commodity. Cars do, and the whole idea of independence and self-expression, passion, etc. It's a magical thing. I think that's what drives us all to this space. And I think Ken was on the forefront of waving that flag, right, and inspiring people to do that. There's so many other people out there inspiring as well. So I'm not discouraged that I think it's a problem. But I am discouraged that Ken's not part of it, because Ken was certainly a leader and will be sorely missed. So the next story we did was Dakar. And I think here again is kind of in the same vein. I think I mentioned it before as Electrikhana. Oh, hold on. Let me back up a minute. Electrikhana, Brian mentioned it in the previous story, so I don't think I'm letting any secrets out, but they actually filmed another one. Right, they were moving so fast that Electrikhana got filmed in Vegas, and then by the time it was out, they had already been. I don't know if it was already filmed, but it was already filmed before the end of the year. There was another one filmed, and they had learned so much with the first filming that they had evolved the car a bit. And Ken was able to do stuff. As I understand it, I wasn't there, but was able to do stuff that he hadn't been able to do before. So with Ken's passing, I don't know how that will affect the tie-in with Audi and Hoonigan. Nobody's really spoken about it, and it's not really our place to ask right now, right? We'll do our best to try and get that information as it comes out, make sure our members know about it. But how this plays out, I'm sure, I know Brian and the team at Hoonigan have already talked about, there's a lot of stuff that they have, again, not just Electrikhana, but there's a lot of stuff in general that they had filmed of him, and they're gonna let it kind of out as it makes sense for them. And where this goes further with Audi, I don't know, because Travis, of course, does the Subaru stuff, where they just did a Subaru-based Gymkhana as well. But Travis Pastrana I'd have to think, is contracted with Subaru as well. So I don't know that really works. And I've heard rumors of Leah Block, which is Ken's daughter, who's starting a rally career of her own, but she's 16 and would love to see it happen. But as a dad of a 16-year-old myself, I also hope she has the time to just grow up and finish being a kid, right? So obviously our thoughts are with her and her family in this time afterwards, but whatever, we'll see where it goes with Hoonigan. Moving along to Dakar, another thing that's interesting about the Hoonigan car, the S1 Hoonitron, is that it uses a Formula E motor. So Audi Sport has developed this MGU05 motor for Formula E. And then, of course, when they ended the Formula E program, they still had this development. And so they used two of them in the S1 Hoonigan, and then they use actually three in the RSQ e-tron that runs at the car. So one for the front axle, one for the rear axle, just like the Hoonigan. And then in the RSQ e-tron, because it's a hybrid, they use the third one as an energy recovery or recuperation mechanism, and they have that hooked up to the 2-liter DTM engine that Audi Sport had developed for the final years of DTM when they'd moved to the 4-cylinder turbo spec, and that was like an Ulrich Boretsky development. So like a really interesting reuse of technology entirely with the car. We did a preview of the car in the issue because the car hadn't started yet. The car has since come and gone right at the beginning of January, and unfortunately Audi had to retire 2 of its vehicles from I guess had been involved in crashes and what have you, and we're kind of out of contention. But whatever, they had enough of issues on this round that their 2 most experienced drivers were kind of left out of contention. And Matthias Ekstrom, who was kind of further back, and it was only his second year at the car, was kind of the final Audi driver in contention. And he did okay, but it was a bit of a challenge, right? Because they were just behind, but the car showed a lot of pace. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. I hope Audi sticks with it, right? Rally and pushing electric technology in such an extreme location is so within, maybe not the electric part is new to Audi, but everything else is very familiar to Audi, right? Like rallying and pushing new technology in very extreme environments. Obviously that harks back to Quattro, and then experimenting as well with more of a science fair type of theme, which is what you really saw in LMP1 racing, right? Whether it was like direct injection with the R8s or the diesels then with the R10 and the R18, and then hybrids with the R18 in the final eras. And it's really, watching that LMP1 era too, in the science fair kind of atmosphere, you had this, you look at the RSQ e-tron, it's this excellent sort of like perfect storm of the Quattro era kind of harkens that, and the LMP1 era kind of harkens that, and then in this kind of spaceship looking thing that the RSQ e-tron is. So all really cool. And they didn't see a win this year, and they were very much in a position to be there. They were very competitive. Still a very cool program, and I don't know that I've seen talk of like either going further in the FIA Rally Raid series where they're located, or where the car is part of, rather. So I guess they're qualified for that, right? The car is homologated for the car, so it could run in that series, and they have kind of used that for kind of shakedowns and some of the other races, but they've kind of cherry picked it. I hope they stay with it. I don't know if they're going to do the whole series. I don't know if that makes sense, especially with F1 and the other stuff they're planning. But at the same time, it's so very cool. I hope they keep gunning for the car and they keep this program going, because it's really impressive. All right, so the next story we did for the magazine was while I was over in Germany and happened to be grabbing dinner or catching up with an old friend of mine from Audi Design, Gary Telak. And Gary, total Audi enthusiast, has a 220 valve 91 Avant, a very special one, cool, like kind of, it's probably one of the earliest Audi exclusive cars, right? It was a test paint out of like a green color that Audi was considering never actually put into production. So it's the only one that was ever made. It's always been owned by somebody in the Audi design department. One of the coolest cars. We're gonna have to feature it at some point. He's got a Coupe S, 100 Coupe S that he's kind of car sitting for a friend in Greece, and then dailies in SQ8. Just really, really cool guy. When I was telling him I was just looking for some stuff to do, I had a couple days to kill between 2 different Dolce Vita tours of Audi Club members who were coming to Germany. Was looking for things to do. He said, "Well, have you seen the Elegend El1? It's an EV made to kind of harken the Sport Quattro that Audi made in the 80s, and it's being built by a German startup it's like a monocoque chassis and electric drivetrain, and they're going to be, rather than just building kind of like Sport Quattros only, they're going to do a small run of these, and then using this technology, this chassis set, component set, they're going to do other kind of probably rally icons." If you caught one of our more recent podcasts, Marcus Holzinger from Hote Design is one of the partners in Elegend, and caught up with him to kind of discuss that. which was background for the story in the magazine. So if you're just listening to our podcast for the first time, check out one of the most recent episodes with Marcus, and he speaks much more about it. But we were able to go by Hote Design Studios and take a closer look at the E-Legend, which is just really, really rad. It's interesting in that this car, it's not intended to be an Audi, right? Like it definitely harks certain Audi Sport Quattro design cues, but it's not, other than that, it doesn't really share anything with Audi, right? Like it's a carbon monocoque. It might, who knows, they may buy some components, being that they're based in southern Germany. Some of these components may be components that Audi, OE suppliers may also use or sell Audi. I don't know. That hasn't really been determined because the car's not really in production yet. This was a kind of rolling prototype. Because it's not an Audi, they're able to do things that I think Audi may not even do, right? Like Audi, when they make a car, has a particular current design language, whether it's used to the single frame or whether it's more aerodynamic needs. So you have these sort of like sport back, very smooth and efficient body lines. The E-Legend has this very distinctive 80s kind of C-pillar that harks the Quattro. So, almost literally, but really it's not a retro design. It's a design that sort of breaks from, the modern norms of kind of jelly bean or very smooth or very, subtle or not so subtle sometimes, but like body shaping, et cetera. And with to me, one of the more interesting parts is like the front. Audi has a single frame, and everything has that single frame in some way or derivation. And with this, they don't really need to do a single frame. And kind of like hearkening the kind of two horizontal lines, if you will, of the original Sport Quattro grille, and then the lower grills. In doing that, it's interesting though, they almost created like a very extreme single frame, right? Like it's the way this is kind of framed around and goes up and around the front of the vehicle. But it's probably something more extreme than Audi would never do nowadays. So it's interesting to see. While this isn't an Audi, I still think it's relevant. We've covered Spiker and other companies like that, right? That used Audi components in the past. Stylistically, the Spiker looked nothing like anything that Audi would ever built, and you'd never know other than it's got a 4.2 underneath and some Audi OEM parts that they bought from suppliers. So like, in this case, even if it uses no supplier parts, it harkens so much Audi design that it's still kind of put it in the family, if you will, of something Audi enthusiasts would care about and be interested in. So, and this is kind of like an interesting product too, because it's like an EV, but they're trying to do what kind of Singer does, right? Which is this: if you have a lot of money, because it's probably pushing $1 million, I'd imagine. Again, the numbers in the story in the book. You'll have this very exclusive car. And while it isn't like based on some older car like a Singer is, like an old 911, it's entirely new and very unique. So I wish them the best of luck. I would love to be able to buy one of these. I wish I had the money to just be able to put a deposit on one, because they are beautiful in person. They're incredibly captivating, and I'm curious how they play out and are received once they come to the market. And I encourage Marcus and his team. I hope they do very well with it, because that's something where if the EV market goes there, right, I think I can see, enthusiasts can see where that's a much more approachable thing. It's a future I want to live in, where you have enthusiasts buying cars like that versus just crossovers that are, A to B. And then while I was, that was kind of another story that we did. Since I was over in Germany, I was over there kind of with Audi Club sends guests on the R8, typically R8 Dolce Vita tour, which is driving from southern Germany, Bavaria, down into Italy in typically R8s, but now moving towards some EVs as well. They're starting to include RS e-tron GTs. We're still doing tours around the R8 exclusively, but with the R8 sunsetting, you have the GT, the RS e-tron GT kind of taking up that space and that baton and moving on. So I went over for a week. We had some guests. You see in this photo, we're at Museum Mobile and visiting Ingolstadt and the facilities there before they head out on trip, and then I had a couple days down before, and the next wave of guests came into Munich and went to do the same thing. So several days to kill, and during that time, I was able to borrow a Q4 from Audi, which got me around southern Germany, right? So there I am in Munich with the car, and drove it down into Austria, into the mountains, down near Salzburg. Went over to Stuttgart to visit Porsche. Went over to Kempten to see Opt Sportsline, and Neckarsulm to the Audi Forum, etc. Like really got around. And I guess what I would say is like that it was in, I've spent a lot of time in electrics, and, have learned a lot, but it was interesting to see because like that's all been here, right, in the US. And now I'm over in Europe where the charging network's a little different, whether I don't have their apps on my phone, and the hookup is different, but largely the same, right? So, but I wasn't really sure going across. And so having an EV was a little bit of a stress inducer, only because I'd have to learn the new system. I'd have to download all the apps and hit them all in the right way, and hope they aren't down, because charging systems aren't always up, right? So at least here in the US. So like having an EV was a bit of a mixed bag. I thought, well, maybe I can get an RS3 Sportback, right? Like I can just fill it up whenever I need to. And in case of an EV, I'm going to have to stop and charge. And no joke, I started in Munich and went up to Ingolstadt, and then back down to Munich, and then out to Salzburg, and then into Kempten, and then across Stuttgart was in there. Like there was a lot of driving, and that was the challenge, right? Because in some cases you're trying to get places in one day where you're on the autobahn, and on one hand you want to bomb, right? It is the autobahn. You can go unlimited speed. Why wouldn't you? So you're flying along, but you're also watching your range come down quite a bit, because at autobahn speeds, you're definitely at a different level of consumption of electric or fuel than you are in the US, even at like higher speeds. Higher speeds in the US aren't quite the same, unless maybe you're in Nevada and playing with your own luck, hopefully not to get pulled over. But in Germany, it's completely legal to go unlimited speed, and if you're in an unlimited speed zone and you want to. And so I'm trying to get places, but I'm also trying to have fun. And you got to stop and charge, and then you're down, and you're down for however many minutes, and you hope you hit the right speed charger. I will say their infrastructure is way better over there. They have a lot more chargers and everything's uniform. Teslas don't have their own special chargers as they do here in the US. They've kind of forced Elon to do a standardized plug so that everybody's using the same stuff. And they have a lot more EVs on the road over there that I experienced, at least. Maybe not more than California, but certainly more than me here in Pennsylvania. And a lot more charging stations, and for the most part faster. I did have some challenges just kind of like getting different networks to work. But when I could, I stayed on Ionity stuff, because like in the US with Electrify America, it's the fastest and seemingly the most reliable. So I used those when I could, but not having a home base. I'll kind of get to that when I'm going to talk here a little bit in kind of my own ownership experience, but like not having a home base where I could just charge it in overnight, it was a bit of a challenge. Like I tried charging it when I stayed near Ingolstadt, near the factory, and there's some factory chargers there, but I didn't have the key code or whatever to make it work there, so I couldn't charge overnight there. So every time I charge, I have to find fast charging, because slow charging, I wasn't either staying in a hotel that had it, or I wasn't, I was on an Audi corporate facility where I didn't have the Audi corporate card or the code to make it work. And kind of over here in the US, we have a little bit more in the way of free chargers, I think, at least in my experience. So that was one thing. Wanted to go fast on the Autobahn, found myself going slower because, it's more efficient. So if you needed to get from X to Y and you don't want to stop, you go a slower speed, which was a little bit sad, right? Like, when you're on an unlimited speed zone and you want to go and have fun, if you're traveling and you don't know where you are, you don't. If I were here, if it were near my home and I knew where I was charging, or I knew my places to charge, and I were familiar with it, or I had that key code or that card that worked or app that worked at the charging station, I wouldn't have that sort of experience. But I'm a bit of an alien, right? In Germany, I don't really know the lay of the land. I don't know the system. And so I'm a little bit more cautious, and it kind of slowed me down a bit. But I'll say, like, that said, it didn't, like, I was driving at one point from Stuttgart to Munich, and the Autobahn between Stuttgart and Munich is a lot of unlimited high speed, and obviously executives from, Munich area, which could be anywhere from BMW to potentially Audi coming from north of Munich, and then jumping on that route to Stuttgart. And then of course, Stuttgart being home to Mercedes and Porsche, there are a lot of like big dog cars that go up and down that stretch. And when I was heading back to Munich from Stuttgart, I did notice might have been Nagaro Blue, might have been one of the Porsche like Maritime or Shark Blues. Wasn't really able to tell, but a Porsche Taycan Sport Turismo is like a wagon version of Porsche Taycan, and same platform that the e-tron GT is on, coming in a line of other cars just moving. Like, I mean, you're on the autobahn, you stay out of the way of cars moving fast, and this car was flying. And I'm in the second lane, maybe the third, but probably going along at like 75 to 90 miles per hour or thereabouts, right? And this Taycan just, bombing past me, and then dropped out for a moment into and went to the far right lane and just kind of slowed down. You have to wonder if he had a text or a call or something that he was dealing with, and he dropped out of the fast lane, did whatever he had to do, and then he got back out in the fast lane and immediate torque and was gone. And I will say, like, seeing somebody who wasn't concerned about consumption, wasn't concerned about where he was stopping to charge, and had a car that was incredibly capable. I'm sure it was like a Turbo S or whatever the fastest version was. It clearly looked like it, at least from watching it go. And the pace at which he was able to come along, and then, stopping down to about my speed in front of me, and then getting back out and going back into warp, if you will, right? Like going back to full speed. It was really impressive to watch. And so while I was a lot on this trip, I was getting a little bit depressed because, like, you already hear about things of like people kind of against the autobahn remaining unlimited speed. I hope that never changes, right? Because it's a wonderful thing. But seeing that there are still people in the electric age enjoying it in that way, that Taycan owner was really kind of encouraging to me, right? That it's not something that will be lost with the EVs coming in. And I'm guessing he has a place to charge when he gets home, right? A couple exits up or whatever. When he gets back to Stuttgart, he probably plugs it in, and there's really no concern about, not really range anxiety, but more charging anxiety, right? Like I knew how far I could get and the car was in, but I knew how fast I had to go. And it wasn't really anxiety. It was just more like, man, that stinks. I can't go, as fast as I want, or the Q4 would take me, because, I want to get there. And if I go at that speed, I'm not going to get there. And then I'm going to have to stop and charge. It's a learning curve, right? But it'll be interesting to see as the infrastructure comes along, what have you. I will say on that trip too, though, and this is kind of where we are, right? At this kind of crossroads of EV and ICE. One of the things that I did was I stopped at Opt Sportsline to say hi to Carla and the team there, and see some of the cars they had on display, shoot their facility. And they were kind enough to let me take an RS6 Plus out and also review that in the magazine. I'm not going to get into that here. Loved it. I own an RS6, very OE approach to tuning with Opt, and it's faster and it handles more precisely and everything else. So really cool sort of thing. If you have an RS6 and you want something a little bit more edge, I think Opt makes an amazing product. But like for me, it was also really interesting getting out in this car, having come in the Q4 and trying to like maintain my range, and knowing I had to be there by a certain point during the day, and so I didn't have time to stop and charge again. So I had to like stick to a certain speed to make sure I could get there. Fortunately, Opt had a 50 kilowatt charger. Threw the Q4 on the charger while I was there, so it would be full charge by the time I go to leave. But then they handed me the keys to the RS6 and said, go have fun and see you in a bit. And I went out to look for a place to photograph the thing. I found, obviously you can see, I found this property here where I shot it, but like it was, an elation, right? Now I can get on it, and the sounds and the delivery, and it's just so raw and so in your face and so attention getting, not unlike that Taycan Sport Turismo, right? Where it's something that more lustful than, say, a small to mid-sized crossover. And it was amazing. Anyway, I'm still very much at this crossroads, right? Like we need both. And so sometimes when you hear that like internal combustion's going away, I can definitely, that's where I'm like, I'm not full on Kool-Aid drinking, full on EV, right? Like I embrace it, and I know it's coming, and I want to be an early adopter, but at the same time, like I totally get where other people are coming from too, because if that RS6 is gone, if I can no longer have access to that, then nobody's going to take them away per se, but when they stop making them, that's going to be a bit of a something to be missed, right? Because it's such a cool thing in so many ways, whether it's the sound of the power delivery, or the way it says "get out of the way" with the growl and the audible rumble as it comes along. Anyway, it was just interesting because driving them back to back was a real eye opener in a lot of ways. It kind of spoke to kind of this crossroads that so many of us find ourselves in, including, I'm sure, people who are developing new product at Audi. So kind of on that note, right, like we've had our e-tron, like our family e-tron, since 2019. E-tron came out in the US in kind of summer of 2019, maybe early summer, late spring. And then by September, my wife had taken a new job, and we had went to the dealer and ordered an e-tron. We got this is ours, CM beige, and which is kind of like Porsche chalk, but a little more on the beige side of that than chalk, which is a little more on the white side. Ours has been lowered a little bit, and then I run 22-inch SQ7 wheels just to kind of make it look cool, right? I'm an enthusiast, and I want to make it unique and make it more sporting, and that's what we did. So that is our e-tron. But nowadays, that was September 2019, and it's now February of 2023. So we've got a number of years on the car, and 56,000 miles, 57,000 miles, something like that. So have had plenty of experience driving it long distance, short distance, getting to know infrastructure and everything else, and a lot of lessons learned. And I think that's where, like, it's hard sometimes sitting in this crossroads between or space between people who are full-on EV proponents and people who are full-on ICE proponents and anti-EV, right? Like, and the whole spectrum in between. It's definitely been an eye-opener of like seeing the good and the bad that come with EV. And with the good, the e-tron is an excellent vehicle. My wife's purpose is she has a 70-mile-a-day commute, and I mentioned, I think early in this, that I'm kind of holed up with COVID at the moment, and I'm quarantining here at the office. And last week my wife had COVID first, and I didn't, so I'm taking the girls, our daughters, to school every day. Their school is near my wife's work, so it's like a 30-mile run, and I drove the EV all week, right? We have an RS6 and an e-tron in the household, and trying to keep the miles off the RS6, but also trying not to burn a lot of fuel and a lot of money. I could come over every night and charge it up. I never had to stop for gas. It's already aggravated to be spending so much time a day driving. What's my wife's normal daily commute? I was doing twice a day to take the girls in and out from school, and then still come to work. So 140 miles a day in the middle of winter, by charging it up to 100% every day, I was able to do that run no problem and still have some juice to get around town. So obviously it's in the winter, so the battery's lower. Normally in the summer we get like 200 to 220 miles out of range, and even still today now with software updates and 50,000+ miles on the car, we're still doing that. But like during the winter when things are cold, it doesn't go as far, and with two other bodies in the car as well for part of that, it's not running efficiently. And of course, I'm not driving slowly on the highway where we are. So 150, 160 miles are what you get on a 100% charge. But like, we have a home charger, charges in about 6 or 7 hours, and so when you park it at night, you're done. And so my wife never stops for gas. In fact, she gets aggravated when she has to drive my car because she has to stop for gas, and that's something she just doesn't have to worry about anymore with her car. So she actually prefers that. That's all. It's all for what you need the car to do, right? The RS6 does very different things for us than the e-tron, and whether that's just the noises it makes, or being an RS6, the performance, or whether it's going to Maine when we go on, it's like a 10-hour drive. Last summer we took the RS6. The year before we did take the e-tron, and we just worked around the charging, but which is doable entirely. And I think we've covered that in podcasts here before too, like doing long distance road trips with it. It's certainly doable, but the convenience of ICE is still there. And so like, I still feel, you need, depending on your needs, I guess, right? Like, I still think there's a market for both, but the e-tron is, or EVs in general, are an amazing product for people who have that sort of consumption. And last week, I definitely had that sort of consumption. I didn't want to drive the RS6. I wanted to drive the e-tron. It definitely met that need. On the downside, though, I have to say, like, this is where I get concerned, where Audi is, Daniel Weissland, when I was at the Q4 launch in California, mentioned CEO of Audi, or president of Audi of America, Daniel Weissland, said that they will stop developing internal combustion from 2025. So that doesn't mean internal combustion cars stop being produced in 2025, but what it does mean is like no new developed cars at that point beyond 2025. And that to me it seems a bit aggressive, right? On one hand, things are moving very fast in the conversion to electric, but on the other hand, I've now had this e-tron from 2019, right? It's now 2023. So let's say 4 years. And in 2025, it's just 2 years from now. And then 5 to 7 for a production cycle of that final run of new vehicles. It's not that far out. You're saying maybe 9 years total until you're probably full EV at Audi. And now nobody's told me that exactly, right? But I'm just kind of doing the math. If they're done developing by 2025, and 7 years is probably about life cycle, maybe further. But that's probably a safe assumption. Where I'm going with that is, like, we bought our e-tron in 2019, and very quickly I took it to Vermont on a road trip. And what I learned was that, the closest Electrify America is from my home in central Pennsylvania is probably about 30 miles from here, near where like I-81 and I-76, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, intersect in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Was the closest Electrify America, and then there were a couple others in Pennsylvania kind of around as I would hit a road trip. And when you own an EV, for the most part, the most convenient way to own it is like charging at home or charging at work. Whenever you have downtime, slow charging, it's the best for maintaining the life of the battery. It's the best way to charge the car. So fast charging is hard on the battery. It's going to lower its useful life. So continual fast charging is not really what you want to be doing. You want to have some sort of slow charge during downtime. Is the most efficient way to own an EV. We have a charging at home, level 2, and my wife has level 2 charging at work, which is free for her. So it's both economical and it's good for the car. And it's always while she's downtime, right? Either at work or at home sleeping, and it charges. So usually if you live in that sort of optimum use world, like my family does, you're dealing with fast charging then only when you're on road trips. And then, you're down for like 15, 20 minutes, you get the heart of the battery charged. You're maybe not charging it up the full way because it's fastest from like 20 to 80%. So beyond that, you're just sitting. So if you stop between 20 and 80 every time, you're going to charge the fastest you can. You could go the whole way to 100, right? But like you're going to spend another 20 minutes getting from like, actually probably more than that, getting from 80 to 100. It's like another 10 minutes or so to 90, and then another like 15 to 90, 100 from my experience. So like, when I'm on long road trips, I just try and keep it in the heart of in the fast charging in the heart of the range of the battery. And you're not really down that much, but you still have to plan your charging stops. And in the 4 years now that I've owned the car, Electrify America has built out its infrastructure pretty well, right? Like we took it first to Vermont that first year, and then taken it to Vermont again. I've taken it to Wisconsin. I've taken it to Maine 2 years ago, or not last summer, but summer of 21. And there's definitely more infrastructure there. Although even here where I am in central Pennsylvania, you have two kind of like major cities by Pennsylvania standards, like Harrisburg, the capital, and Lancaster, which is another city about the same size. Neither of those have an EA station, Electrify America station, nor do they have anything faster than like a 50 kilowatt charger, which is about a percentage point a minute, at a couple of car dealerships. But there's no big fast charging station like an EA, Electrify America would be. That Carlisle location is still the only one around here. And while there are a lot more along like the main routes, I-81 and Pennsylvania Turnpike, I-76 or I-95, it's still not ubiquitous like the Tesla stuff. Like Tesla's on a different network or different, charging hookups. So like until they unify that, you can't use the Tesla stations. I guess the other side to that is Tesla owners, which there are way more electric Teslas on the road right now than there are pretty much anything else. They can't use it's not really optimum for them to use an Electrify America station because only one of those typically an EA. Only one of them is set up for Tesla. Regardless, it's not really building out that fast. And the other side of it is, it's not always like the focus is on build out, not always on maintenance. So like, it's not uncommon now that I'll go to a station and like they're a little buggy, or one's down, or maybe two are down, or whatever. I've now seen a couple situations where, you know, the entire thing is down. And if the entire thing is down, now you've got to find another station. Well, here where I am in central Pennsylvania, if there's one in Carlisle, that's 30 miles away. The next one is probably another 50 miles. So if you got it wrong, you don't really have a lot of options. And like, you know, that's one side of it. The other side of it is there are a lot more electric cars on the road. So when I first bought my e-tron, I went to the Electrify America station in like East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. It was at a Walmart. And I found myself chatting to some Walmart customers who were curious what I was doing. It was like a spaceship that had landed and plugged in, right? And wanted to see what we were doing. And I was one of the first ones they'd seen. That was 2019. My most recent experience was going to an event, car show over in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Enough that I could get there and back, but to be safe, I would stop and throw some charge on. But the event we were going to was literally 2 miles from an Electrify America station. So I thought, well, I'll just stop at EA and throw, you know, 10, 20% on it. I'll be there for a couple minutes and we'll hit the road. But I have no issues driving at whatever speed I want to come home. And so we went there, we went to the event, and we're coming in, or as we're driving in to the event, I drove right past the EA station and I looked down and I thought, well, maybe if they're empty, I'll pop in and throw it on the charger quickly so I don't have to deal with it on the way out. But all the chargers were full. This is like a Saturday morning, right? All the chargers were full, and I can see there are like 2 other cars waiting. And I was like, all right, well, they're busy. I'll hit it on the way out. So we go to the car show, come back a couple hours later, and we come in, and again, they're all busy, and there's one car waiting to charge. And I thought, well, just to be safe, I'm still going to go in and do it. So I, you know, how long can they be? And so pulling in, I'm looking at like everything there. Every car there had out of state plates, which means they're doing exactly what you'd expect them to do, right? They're on a long trip and they need to charge up because they don't have access to a slow charger. All makes sense. So there were like Carolina's plates and like New York plates and, you know, Massachusetts plates, whatever. And here I am in central Pennsylvania. One of the charging stations was down, right? So like all of us tried that one, and I, you know, called Electrify America. They restarted a couple times, whatever, it just wasn't working. So that left 3 others, and which means even though there were 4 cars at the charging stations and 1 ahead of me, now that meant there were 2 ahead of me, and who knows how long that would take. One of the people had left an e-tron, actually another e-tron there charging. It wasn't charging quickly, and they must have gone to like one of the businesses nearby and grabbing lunch or whatever, because at the pace it was charging, it would have taken an hour, right? So you knew that one wasn't going to open up quickly. I did the math and thought, okay, if I drive home at like 55, it was a highway, right? 55 mile per hour speed limit anyway. If I drive home at like 55 to 60, I'll get home, no issues. If I try to drive my normal speed going home, it would have been tight, right? And so knowing that there are no fast chargers near me, and the next fast charger is 30 miles west of me, I needed to get home, or I'd be stopping for hours on a slow charger to get juice to get home. So like it's that situation, right, where like the infrastructure isn't there yet, but unfortunately or fortunately, car manufacturing is, right? Kia, Hyundai, Rivian, everybody's got EVs coming out, Mercedes, BMW. The amount of vehicles on the road now are much, much higher. And even if we all charge at home, which is great, if the infrastructure isn't there to support us on long trips, like all those out-of-state plates that were there, they're on a long trip to wherever they're going, and they're going to sit there until that stuff's done, whether it's charging quickly or whether it's, you know, the e-tron for the guy who went for a burrito, and it's going to take him an hour, even though he's on a fast charger. It's charging at a very slow speed. So like, man, I'm pro EV, and I get where it's going, but the infrastructure is not yet there to support where the cars are on the road now, much less the many, many more in the pipeline. So that's where like I think maybe I diverge even from Audi with their product planning, which is I don't know if 2025 is, or 2030, it put, 25 plus 5 year product life cycle. I don't know if we're there yet. Like, I don't know if I love my e-tron for that, my wife's 70-mile-a-day commute, or me doing the 140 as I was last week. It is an amazing product. But like, for me to go to that car show, had it been 10 miles further up the road, I would have been sitting there for hours, or who knows how long, waiting for one of these other long distance travelers to get off the charger so that I could get home, right? And I don't know. I can check the app and see if there's anybody on EA at like 8 a.m. when I'm leaving my house, and maybe they're not. But that doesn't say they won't be at 9:30 when I roll through there, or afternoon when I come back through. And you can't reserve things like that, so you just have to hope. And so where I've taken my car, my e-tron, to Vermont twice, and I've taken it to Maine once, and I've taken it to Wisconsin once, and I love it. My family has a trip to Charleston, South Carolina next week, and I will not be taking e-tron. I'm not even remotely interested in taking it. And while I love it on the road, it's quiet and comfortable, and love it, I don't want to deal with charging. I don't want to deal with charging with like every Ioniq 5 and whatever Rivian, whatever else is on the road that's going to take up those plugs that I won't be able to charge. And whereas when we went to Maine 2 years ago, I rarely, only once in that entire trip did I have to wait for a charger. There were a couple maybe chargers that weren't working or all that fast or whatever, but only once when I got into like Kittery, Maine, there were a couple of cars there and I had to wait 15 minutes, which was no big deal, right? We weren't in a hurry, and an outlet mall, and my wife and kids went shopping. But like, you just kind of get used to that with travel with electrics. Like I'm okay with like the 15 minutes to 20 minutes to whatever, and I can deal with it, check my mail on my phone or whatever. But when you start like really getting into the commonality, on one hand, my experience in Allentown was anecdotal, right? Like, you don't always know that like that's the experience, but I can see all these more EVs on the road that I didn't see in 2019 when we bought the car. And I don't see that many more fast chargers going up. Maybe not, maybe in other states, but not here in Pennsylvania. Electrify America has built more, certainly, but not enough that like I really feel comfortable taking the car at this point. I'm definitely going to start watching those stations as I see them driving by when I'm on trips. But for this trip to Charleston, I don't really want to put the miles on the RS6 either. So we've rented an A5 Sportback from one of the new Audi on-demand locations at Audi Conshohocken here outside of Philly, and we're going to take that car to Charleston because it's not really, on one hand, Audi on-demand exists, and that's great. Formerly Silver Car, right? Like Audi's rental agency, and Audi Club, you get a 25% discount, so it made it really affordable to do an Audi, and I'm familiar with Audi products and whatever, so I'm really psyched to be doing that and not have to put those miles on the RS6. But I don't know. I'm worried about EVs and where the market goes, because a ton of new EV cars are coming on the market, and the infrastructure is not really there for long distance travel. So while they're a great product for if you have a charger at home or charger at work, or public charger near your work that you can hit, great, amazing product. But for long travel, it's not there yet. And it's where the infrastructure had definitely gotten there a year ago. And there weren't that many people using them. Today, if I went through East Stroudsburg, I wouldn't be a spaceship landing at Walmart, where those Walmart customers look twice at me, because I'm sure it's a much more common thing. There are cars there all the time. I don't know. I guess I'm just concerned about where this goes, right? Like we need to be spending more on infrastructure if this is going to be a real thing. And I'm concerned for companies like Audi that if you're throwing all your chips in on EVs, and that infrastructure doesn't get there, now it takes so long to develop a car line, but you better hope it's there by the time, that the EV or ICE development ends, and EV picks up. Because, if you're a customer that has to drive more than your range in a day with regularity, you're not going to accept that as a real product. So curious how it goes. Our e-tron hasn't been perfect. We've had a couple mechanical, it's first year production of a new vehicle and all new drivetrain, right? So I'm not really too worried about that. But everything was warranted and whatever else, that's great. We're off warranty now. It's been fine since we've been off warranty, but I'll probably, given like 65,000 miles, the value's starting to come down, et cetera, we'll probably trade that in for I may hold out for the Q8 e-tron. My wife kind of likes the Q4. I've noticed the e-tron GT is starting to depreciate. Where the market is starting to depreciate in general, electrics are kind of being a little soft, and we're seeing like used e-tron GTs even around like where normally I think they start at 110 or more. Used e-tron GTs on Auto Trader and stuff are starting in like the 80s, right? So it's probably a little out of our price range. But if you're going to buy a loaded out new e-tron or Q8 e-tron, it's probably similar money. So I think that's a smoking deal. I am admittedly curious about e-tron GT. I don't know that my wife wants to spend that much money on a car, and it probably wouldn't be all that responsible. Kids going to college and everything else, but I mean, it's cool, and I think that speaks to like availability of electrics too, right? Used e-trons are also getting very affordable, and it's great product. Like if you can deal with the charging, it's an amazing vehicle. Beyond that, I guess that's where I go. Like what I learned in this issue of the magazine, and seeing the R8 going away, seeing the TT going away. And recognizing that like maybe shutting the door on internal combustion entirely is maybe a premature thing to do, at least from my, my little seat here, not at a car company or knowing what Electrify America's plans are, or, other infrastructure and, whatever plans are. I still think that there's a market for internal combustion. And so just thinking, again, this is just me. I haven't heard anything from Audi other than I know that like R8, from last I'd heard, they hadn't decided yet whether to go fully electric with R8 or try and do something that's kind of a blend. It wouldn't be normally aspirated, probably wouldn't be just ICE, but maybe a hybridized something or other. Nobody really knows. So here's what I think they ought to do. One is 2.5 TFSI. It's an Audi developed motor. It's right, like whereas when I say Audi developed, at one time Quattro GmbH, which is an Audi Sport, right, used to make all of their own engines. Volkswagen Group develops engines like the 2.0T, depending on the version, was developed by Volkswagen. The 2.9T, the 3-liter turbo and the 3-liter supercharged developed by Audi. The 2.9 bi-turbo developed by Porsche. The current version of the 4-liter V8 twin turbo that's in the RS6 is a Porsche developed motor. But they're all kind of developed by Volkswagen Group, right? And so the 2.5, the Daza, right, the 5-cylinder turbo that's in the TTRS and RS3 is an Audi derived or Audi developed motor. So what I think they ought to do is continue to keep a core, even perhaps premium, so not your most economic vehicles, right, like A3 or A4 or Q5, 2-liter, Q3. Obviously it wouldn't be there with price point, but develop a hybrid drivetrain 5-cylinder. So in the old days, everything was 5-cylinder anyway, right? And so develop a hybridized 5-cylinder and use that for various things. And for me, the halo cars would be do a next generation R8 hybrid with a 5-cylinder. And the rumor was that in the day they developed a 5-cylinder R8 anyway, but it didn't have the torque signature that they expected for R8. So it really didn't have that low end grunt that like the Audi development team wanted at the time for that car, and the V10 did, right? So but like a hybrid would kind of offset that, right? You'd have all this immediate electric torque and then build boost and boom, it's gone. So do an R8 with that drivetrain and do a I would even argue like something off-road, like an RSQ e-tron for the road, right? Like the Dakar, something inspired by the Dakar program, but an Audi version of like what a Raptor, right? Like the Raptor is basically like a trophy truck built on an F-150. Do something like that. Obviously not a truck, but like something that's, trophy trucks race at Baja, whatever else. They're motorsport inspired, and it's a total perfect halo car for Ford. Makes sense. But now with this RSQ Dakar program, having this sort of like supercar off-road, one, an off-road vehicle wouldn't have to be competing with the likes of Lamborghini or Porsche, the Safari and the Storado, whatever they call it, Storado, is that what they call it? The off-road Huracan or the off-road 911, which is called the Dakar, are kind of different things, right? I'm thinking definitely something a little bit more seriously off-road, and with a 5-cylinder turbo and a hybrid would just be pretty cool. The other thing I guess I'd say, kind of getting around so I'm gonna get a little bit philosophical here, but getting around the nature of applianceification, right? That's something that Scotto and I talked about when we were talking about the idea of like what Electrikhana meant, and the development for it was kind of meaning, and even some of the things we lament about. I know Brian said it very well about the growing up on internal combustion cars and kind of seeing the way it's going and missing the theater, if you will. I think theater was my word, but like in that conversation, but it was more, the visual of flame popping out of the exhaust pipe of some crazy car, or the sound of the whether it's the audible rumble of the engine, or whether it's straight cut gears of a transmission. All these sort of elements of the theater of automotive experience kind of get lost with electrics, because you don't have that flame pop, you don't have the transmission, you don't have, the internal combustion sounds. And so sound and visuals are still, they stimulate you in a way that's very basic, right, and very primal. And electrics are much more sterile, at least as we know them today, right? So maybe whether it's straight cut gears with an actual transmission or something else that's not manufactured and synthesized, I guess, I don't know, maybe eventually, it's kind of like the synthesizer in music, right? In the 80s, when everything was like hair bands and still kind of rock and roll, synthesizers were kind of looked down upon, where nowadays today, house music and full synthesization is really no big deal. Even auto tuning is again, laughed at when it first happened, is kind of much more common today. So maybe tomorrow's customer doesn't care so much about the synthesized version of the theater or the drama, right? But there still has to be drama. Music isn't silent today; it's just different, and maybe more synthesized, but it still very much inspires you in a very raw and guttural way. And it's not elevator music, which I guess is what the appliance of elevator music would be, the effective appliance of the music world, right? Like, it's just there, it's just neutral, it serves a purpose, but it doesn't really inspire, doesn't really get you going, or tapping your foot, dancing, whatever you might do, because you're inspired by the music. And similarly with cars, we run the danger with these silent, very efficient, very comfortable cars like my e-tron. Amazing thing, but is it also, to the people who just want an A to B mover, it's the elevator music just serves a purpose, kind of, you don't even really think about it, you miss it. And with cars, you want that theater, you want that beat that makes you want to go and makes you want to like just inspires you to drive or go someplace or experience that independence and that passion. So I don't know, we need something there. And I would say the other side of that is, in addition to like adding that in, one of the things I genuinely miss, and I think it's happening across the car industry, is it happened before electrification, is the sort of loss of that hidden language of engineering, right? There's this inside baseball kind of like language that enthusiasts speak, and it happened at all brands, right? Like, or not all brands, but like the enthusiast, technology driven brands, the brands where people really cared. You go to a Corvette owner and you tell them, a C8 or a C5 or a C2, they know exactly what it is. To some people, that's just a letter and a number. And honestly, Corvette never marketed any of that, right? So like, it's not like you could read in a Corvette catalog back in the 80s or go on their configurator today and see what a C8 is. You don't know. It's Corvette, it's language amongst Corvette owners. And we have that language at Audi too, right? Whether that's B2 or even more recent, like small chassis Audi, right? Like, which is speaks to just B2, B3, B4 and beyond, like a certain size of Audi, right? But or you talk about engines, whether it's Daza is a great example, right? If you're into modern Audi performance, you know what a Daza is. But if you're not, you don't. And so it's kind of this language that like insiders speak, and we know exactly that we're talking about the current generation 5-cylinder with the aluminum block that's in the TTRS and the RS3. That's a Daza. And that's something that I think car manufacturers, while we still have that language as enthusiasts and know what Daza is, and that's actually an internal code, with the, unlike small chassis, which is like slang that enthusiasts came up with. B2, or even like you go back to that era, B2 is the second generation B chassis, right? So like or Quattro and 4000 is also Type 85 or Type 81, depending on the car. That again, it's nerd language, right? Like, you know, if you know, you know, and if you're really nerdy and really into it, you know. But those are all internal codes. 85 is the beginning of like the number series of parts that you know, if you were to buy parts from that era. But like even still having 1.8T, 2.0T, 2.5T, these were all designators for like a 1.8T is a 1.8 liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that would have been the TT. Or the A4 or the B5, you know, that era car. And it was, you know, there was a badge on the back of the car that said that, so you knew what was in that car. Or the TT V6, the first generation or TT that had the 6-cylinder was a VR6, right? Which is a narrow angle 6-cylinder that was developed by Volkswagen initially for like the GTI and the Jetta and cars like that, but eventually got developed still in production today for like certain larger Volkswagen models. Was in the first Q7, et cetera. But like that BR6 had an identity that was on Volkswagens. It was on the back of those cars. If you had a Corrado of that era and it was a BR6, it said BR6 on the back, and maybe on the front. Nerds will tell me it was SLC on the back, but it was VR6 on the grill, right? And Volkswagen marketed that name, and Audi marketed those names too. And it's you know, the 20 valve on the 220 valve, examples on and on. It's gotten lost across the board, right? An e-tron 55 today, what does that even mean, right? Like 55 is just an arbitrary number that suggests a step in performance or equipment level or whatever else, but it doesn't really say anything. And you see it at you know, BMW, Mercedes, all these brands that have these rich heritage backgrounds of engineering and language around that. Like a BMW, a 320i was a 3 Series 2-liter in 4-cylinder engine, or early days maybe in a 6-cylinder engine, right? And injection. If you were an enthusiast, you knew how to read that. Same with Mercedes, and that's all kind of arbitrary numbers today, and kind of playing with letters to try and cover all the bases, because this is, you know, this number is trademarked by this car company and whatever. It's just kind of gotten lost, this language, and I feel like that might be one way to add some identity back into electrics, right? With kind of talking about the Hoonigan that Ken Block had used for Electrikhana, or the RSQ e-tron that Audi used in the car. Those both use the MG-U05 electric motor that was developed for Formula E. So, right, so Audi developed, as Formula E was opening up for more development and allowing more things to happen technology-wise, not being so spec, Audi developed their own motor, right? So it's basically a motorsport level motor called the MG-U05. Not exactly the most catchy name, but there's an identifier there, right? And you know what it is, and how it's used in racing. It, like, you know, this is not a new thing in the car business, but racing, you know, race on any day you want, sell on Monday, right? Like it's there's something about seeing cars accomplish these incredible feats, or running quickly around whatever, whether that's sliding around Las Vegas in the S1 e-tron or Hoonigan, or whether that's, you know, blasting through the desert on the Dakar rally. It's inspirational. And so, but there's nothing that ties that MG-U05 developed by Audi Sport and has won all these things and done all these things to anything in production, right? And so while that might have been even harder in the day, I mean, arguably, look at companies like Mercedes, or like Aston Martin has their, what is the Valkyrie, that uses kind of like F1 derived whatever. Of course they can, they're at this crazy high level for price point. You still have this kind of carryover of developing for motorsport and then moving that into automotive, where automotive enthusiasts kind of really dig into that, and they see that line and they appreciate it more and buy your car as a result, and get their friends to buy your cars as a result. Developing this MG-U05, I'm not saying maybe use the same, maybe develop a road version of MG-U05 using similar design inspiration of components or whatever, but like you've got this credibility you've created through Formula E, through Electrikhana, through Dakar, and to run that then in the next generation RS6 electric and have an MGU06 or something, some Audi Sport derived motor. We already see companies kind of, whether it's Lucid or I think Koenigsegg also, I think it was, who developed these kind of small lightweight motors that are kind of, you're still not even really seeing them branding them, right? But like that might be something that you do here, like VR6 just meant narrow angle V6 motor, right? But when you say VR6, anybody in the Volkswagen or Audi enthusiast space knows exactly what it is and knows that it's a 6-cylinder that the Volkswagen group, either Volkswagen or Audi made, even Porsche used in the Cayenne. And it is very distinctively technology that belongs to you and your camp. If you're an enthusiast for Volkswagen group brands, it's there and it's part of the component set that you appreciate that engineering. Right now, electric motors in an e-tron GT or a Q4 or a Hyundai or Kia or whatever, there's really no understanding that it's anything different, right? They're commoditized. It's an electric motor. And in a lot of cases, it might be the same component suppliers, much like the 7-speed transmission that's in a lot of cars today is from the same, in a lot of the Audis today is from the same automotive supplier. So I get that, but like having an appreciation for the heart of the vehicle, right? What's creating your drivetrain and making that car go is so core to a car brand. So to make something that's not only like distinctively Audi or distinctively Volkswagen Group or distinctively derived from running up Pikes Peak in the Volkswagen Pikes Peak car, which ID, whatever the hell it was, or running Dakar, or I don't think MGU05, by the way, was used in the Volkswagen Pikes Peak car, but I know it was used in Dakar, and I know it was used in Formula E, and I know it was used in Electrikhana, and there again, to have something kind of derived from that, and even from a marketing standpoint, taking from that, maybe it's much more consumer-oriented electric motor, but you've got that lineage, and it's Audi Sport developed that creates a premium and a passion-inspiring mechanism, right? Not just the mechanism of the motor, but like the mechanism of like how we as enthusiasts learn to appreciate something. I appreciate that it's been raced. I appreciate that it was derived that way, and I appreciate that that's unique to my Audi or unique to my Volkswagen Group vehicle. That it's not going to be in any Ioniq 5 that I see at Electrify America station while I'm waiting for a charger. So like, that's kind of where this is me getting on my soapbox to Audi, because I don't really have somebody to speak to there right now to kind of like sing this to, right? But like I feel like we're missing the opportunity where it's all there, right? Like you're doing these things anyway. You're about to go into Formula One as well, which by the way is hybrid. So I think it goes back to like speaking to doing the hybrid R8 and the hybrid or R8 replacement of the hybrid RSQ for the road, right? Like you're already going to do hybrids anyway. So why not just keep it going with a certain line of your product that's hybridized, that's going to get people beyond like the lack of charging infrastructure for the foreseeable future, and go back to just one core motor that does everything, kind of like you did in the 80s and 90s. But like beyond that, Audi Sport derived whatever, this MGU05, like how can we have something that's for the road that's kind of like derived from this, right? It makes total sense. And as an enthusiast, I'm looking for that language. I'm looking for that language that I can use with other enthusiasts to kind of share in our passion. And I'm looking for that kind of inside knowledge that I can look more informed and more credible. Literally, as I'm recording this, I'm getting a text from a friend of mine from college who's happens to be in Chicago at the Chicago Auto Show and wondering if I'm possibly there because I work in the car industry, right? And am I around to kind of meet up, right? And chat about the cars that are there, because she wants to know more. And presumably I'm the expert she knows, right? We all kind of have that influence over our friends and end up talking about cars to our friends because we have that knowledge. And you're not giving us language to work with, right? And it can't all be A to B crossovers. It's got to be things that inspire passion. And I say this as somebody who owns an RS6, because in the days of the first RS2, the AD Avant was probably today's crossover, right? Like it was this kind of like family mundane people mover compared to the sports cars of the time. But it's clearly a sports car. And while that Q4 is great in the canyons, I was pleasantly surprised we need things that are passion inspiring. Why else do we care? Like, why do we want to buy an Audi? Why do we want to buy a sports car? Why do we care about owning a car at all? Maybe if I only use my phone and I don't have to commute and I can walk everywhere, I live in New York City, whatever, I don't care. But if I'm the Volkswagen Group and if I'm Audi and I make cars, I need to care. Like, if cars are your core product, I need to care. And that is my concern, right? Like, you can go and you can market to people at ski slopes or lifestyle events or restaurants or wherever, and they might buy your car today, and that's great. But what keeps them buying your car? Because they'll move away like this. You need something that like inspires passion, inspires investment in brands, and whether that's Disney getting people to be invested in Marvel or Star Wars or princesses over other theme parks or movies or whatever. What makes people want to care to stay in Audi or Volkswagen Group brands? And I feel like, whatever. I sorry, I'm on a soapbox here, but like, to me, this is something that definitely needed to be riffed upon. It's kind of something that came out of that original conversation with Scotto when we were talking about Electrikhana, and I've kind of since been thinking about it a lot as I was developing a lot of that electric and Technic issue, and it's something that's just kind of bubbling up. And I had a few minutes here as I'm in my COVID bunker and wanted to go over it. So if you're still into this, I know I've gone on a long time. Damn, I can talk a lot. Damn, didn't even have a guest today. It's terrible. But anyway, I'm going to end it because I've gone on long enough, and the soapbox is about ready to collapse under the weight of my self-indulgence. But at the end of the day, I thank you for sticking around. If you did, we're going to get back to normally scheduled programming here. Probably going to cover the new website here shortly because we hope to have it launched here shortly. I should have been probably working on that today too. But wanted to get another podcast out, and then look for more guests again soon. We're going to go back to the guest models. You're not going to have to listen to me just talk. But we have a couple people lined up that we're going to be talking to soon, and I'd like to get some others. If you have some ideas for either stories for the magazine or future podcasts, etc., drop us a note. Either admin at audiclubna.org, or if you've emailed directly with me, George.Achorn at audiclubna.org, and we'll look to get more soon. Otherwise, have a good one. Thanks, everybody.